Well, good morning, church. As Jared mentioned, this will be a little different this morning with Kid Power. So the message is divided in two parts. So here in a little bit, after Bob Bloomingberg's prayer, Kid Power will be dismissed for a couple songs, and the second part of the message, and they'll rejoin us for family communion. Today is family communion. It'll be near the end of the service. And so if you haven't done that before, I'll go ahead and explain it now. We will have an opportunity where we'll all stand up, we'll play some music, you'll have a chance to come down and receive communion. We'll have the Fricks on this side and the Dobbins on that side, and if you can come and enjoy and laugh and hug and receive communion, and then if you're not able to come down the aisle, we'll have somebody bring it to you at the end of that time. So that'll take place at the end of service. This morning, I want to recognize something that happened last week that was really, really exciting and quite chilly. Kaysen Riley took on Christ and was baptized in a partially filled, very, very cold baptistry. Was it cold, Kaysen? It was cold, wasn't it? I felt it through the waiters. And so we have a baptismal certificate here for Kaysen that we want to give him to commemorate that. So let's hear it for Kaysen. We're so proud of you, buddy. So proud of you. He's a handsome little man, isn't he? All right. I just heard a snippet of this when I was walking through, so Andrea, you'll have to help me if I get the details wrong, but Andrea works for a health organization that takes care of people living with HIV, which has been quite a prayerful ministry for her, I know, and really moving and life-changing in a lot of ways. Your organization received an award for, was it Best Healthcare Organization? Nonprofit of the Year. So, wow. And I know that that's probably a lot of wonderful people there, but you're one of the wonderful people there, so you had a part in that. And so we're very proud of you and proud of the work that you're doing there. So congratulations on that. That's a little bit actually about what I want to talk about today is that when people are pretty amazing. God created us in his image, and he's a creator, and so he made us as creators. He made us creative. And when people put the work in and they apply their creativity and they work hard, they can do some pretty awesome and amazing things. It's hard to believe sometimes the things that people can come up with. In fact, I want to give you a couple examples. Did you know that there is a company called BAE Systems who has created real-life invisibility? And so this picture that you're looking at is this helicopter on the bottom is covered with little LED arrays, basically small televisions. They can put these on anything. On this image above, the one on the left is an armored vehicle. That's how this huge armored vehicle. On the right, they use cameras that point at the trees, and then they project on it the image of the trees, and then they put the outline of an SUV so that in a wartime situation, somebody wouldn't know it was an armored vehicle. They just think it's a small SUV parked there. They can effectively hide giant armored vehicles from the enemy by making them invisible through this technology. There's also another technology in the work that actually is an invisibility cloak. It allows light to wrap around you and make you invisible. And they've demonstrated that it works, and they're just trying to get it to a bigger scale. This is something that people created out of their brains and their ingenuity and their hard work. Another pretty amazing thing is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movies where there's like 20-foot tall robots that battle each other, and you're like, that's so crazy, that's off in the future somewhere. Actually, it's in the past. In 2017, this company called Megabots sponsored the first ever giant robot battle between the U.S. and the Japanese. I think we have a picture here. There we go. These are the two robots that fought. Now, these things are 20 feet tall. They're the size of cars. And a person actually got inside of these robots, and they fought. And they had like chainsaws for arms and paintball guns and cutting welders, and they fought each other. And this actually happened all the way back in 2017 because of human ingenuity. Did you know that Disney recently invented an all-direction treadmill? You might be like, what on earth? Why would anybody want that? Well, if you're Disney, it makes sense because you can have a ride where people put on a VR headset and they walk whichever direction they want but don't go anywhere. So you can go into a room and you can be inside of any Disney movie you want, walk around and explore the whole thing without ever leaving the space you're in. This is an unbelievable invention that people created with their own creativity and ingenuity. Now, those are some examples of really, really cool things, high-tech things that people invented. But some of the most amazing things are the ones that, you don't really ever hear about. They're low-tech or they're just ridiculous, but they're just as creative. So how about this? You ever thought, I have this massive stretch limo and I'd really like to put a camper on it? Well, somebody figured out how to do that, I mean, who wouldn't want to go camping in a stretch limo, right? Or what about this one? How do you make the coolest wheelchair ever? Well, you put tank treads on it. John, you want to sign up and get one of those? Man, it's all terrain. Yeah, I think it'd be awesome. What about this? What do you do when you have a flat but you don't have a spare tire? You get a work cart and slide under there, drive around town. I mean, people can actually do really amazing, incredible, sometimes not very safe, but really amazing, incredible things when they put their minds to it. I think my favorite is by this YouTube guy named Mark Rober. Now, some of you might have heard of this guy before because he's become very, very famous. He was a NASA engineer. He worked on the Curiosity rover for Mars, but that wasn't really a fulfilling career for him, so he became a YouTuber instead. And so now he does the most amazing YouTube videos. And the one that he really became famous for was one day he found out that, where's my package? I ordered something off Amazon and it's not here. And they said they delivered it and it hadn't come. So he went and looked at his footage on his Ring doorbell and he saw somebody had just walked up in the middle of the day on his porch, taken the package and just taken off with it. And he was ticked. So he went to the police and he gave them the footage and they didn't do anything about it. They said there was nothing they could do. They couldn't. And he was so upset that somebody could just walk up in the middle of the day, caught on film, taking this package away, and that there's nothing that could be done. And he found out this is something that happens all over the country all the time. So he decided he was going to do something about it. So being an engineer from NASA, he engineered this insane contraption that had 4 phones inside of a box. The box was made to look like it was an Apple HomePod, which at the time was like $600 to buy. And it had little circles cut out in the packaging with mirror glass foil where the cameras from the phones pointed through. So it was filming in all directions. And so he put this thing on his porch and he just waited for somebody to take it. Somebody comes and they takes it. And he uses the cameras are all the time uploading their footage and their GPS data to the cloud. So as soon as the thing moves, he's alerted. He starts watching live as this thing is carried off in this person's car. And when they get a safe distance from his house, they take the lid off, and as soon as they do, it shoots out glitter all over his car. Now, if you've ever gotten glitter anywhere, you know it, but it just shoots this huge cloud of glitter. And as if that's not bad enough, it also shoots out this obnoxious smelling chemical that fills the car with this horrible odor. So they're screaming, their eyes are burning, there's glitter everywhere, and they chuck the package out the window of the car. Of course, he's got the GPS data, so he comes and retrieves it. He calls it the glitter bomb. He's made 4 different versions, the videos, thousands of crooks that have taken this, and they are hilarious to watch the reactions of these people. Talk about the creativity and the ingenuity applied to do something like this. So I'm amazed sometimes. At all the things that people can do when they apply their God-given abilities of creativity and ingenuity, and then they put the work in to do it. We can do the work to build spaceships, skyscrapers, and even supercomputers that we can hold in our hands. But you know what the work that we put in can't do? The work that we put in cannot ever free us from the guilt and the shame of our sin. There's so many things we can do by the work of our hands, but we can't do that. And so in the book of Romans, Paul tells the Gentiles they have no excuse. God clearly revealed himself in the amazing creation all around them. He put the law on their hearts, and they still disobeyed. So they stand accused and condemned. But then he turned his sights on the Jews. And he said, don't stand there and snicker at the Gentiles, because you don't have any advantage over them. You had the law given to you. You were revealed who God is. You were explicitly told how to please God. And you still failed. So you also stand condemned. So what do we do with the guilt and the shame that is rightfully ours? Well, let's go all the way back to the first covenant God made. A covenant with Abraham. It was the covenant of circumcision, where God bound himself to the people and they bound themselves to him. What was it about Abraham that God saw as righteous? Why did he think Abraham was a righteous man? What did Abraham do that got God's attention? If you turn with me, we'll be in Romans chapter 4, in the first 5 verses this morning, verses 1 through 5 of Romans chapter 4. What then shall we say? That Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, discovered in this matter, if in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. Now Abraham, God saw him as righteous. God made a covenant with him. And they committed themselves to each other. God committed himself to Abraham. Abraham committed himself to God. Now on the level of commitments, not all commitments are equal. Maybe they should be. Our yes should be yes and our no should be no. But they're not all equal. Because, if somebody says they're going to do something, they make a commitment to you verbally, that's level 1, right? We had a verbal commitment. Even the courts recognize a verbal commitment. But what's level 2? Well, put a handshake on it, right? We're going to seal this deal with a handshake. That's a level 2 commitment. But then, a signed contract is a notch above that. That's a level 3 commitment. And again, even the courts would say, we had a verbal deal, we had a handshake deal. Well, we signed a contract. But then there's a surety bond. Now, if you've ever gone to a notary public, you go to a notary because you have a document that needs to be verified, and that person signs and verifies that you are the actual signer of that document. But in order to make sure that that notary has faith, that they act in accordance with the best interests of the law, that they're not being bribed, the notary has to put up a surety bond. They have to take $1,000 of their own money, and they have to put it in trust with the state for the entire 4 years that they're a notary. And if they falsify any documents during that time, guess what? They lose their $1,000. So that type of commitment is a level 4 commitment. You've got, just saying you're going to do something, you got a handshake, you got a signed contract, but a surety bond where you actually have to put down your own assets as collateral against your word, that's a level 4 commitment. Then there's circumcision. We're just going to call that a level 5 commitment. There's really not a lot more that you can do that shows you're committed more than that one. Okay, so that's a level 5. That's the commitment Abraham makes. It's a commitment in his own body. You've got to be committed to something to make a level 5 commitment. So for the Jewish people, when Paul asks, should Abraham boast in the flesh? Their answer is, yeah, yes, because he committed in the flesh. It was a level 5 commitment. He put his own body on the line for the commitment. He bled for the commitment. Yes, he should be able to boast in his flesh. And the other Jews, the sons of Abraham, who have done the same thing. And this is more than just the pain or the scar. This is something that the entire world laughed at the Jews about. They laughed at them about. They became a laughing stock of the nations. They say, yes, we should be able to boast in this. We've made a big commitment here. But Paul says no. Paul says circumcision is a work, and works don't work. So let me explain that in a minute. Imagine if you are hanging out with God. Everything's great. There's no sin. There's no anything. God created you. You're pure and innocent. You're just hanging out with God, and it's awesome. But then you sin. And as soon as you sin, immediately the ground in front of you, between you and God, just breaks open. Like in one of those movies, you know, those action adventure movies where all of a sudden there's an earthquake and a crevice appears and it's growing wider and wider and the people are on opposite sides and somebody tries to jump and they fall in and they're holding and they pull them up. So you're standing there, you and God, and you sin, and it immediately causes the ground in front of you to crack, and this huge, wide crevice opens up. And before you even realize it, God is on the other side of the Grand Canyon from you. And you can't get to him. You are separated from God by this giant canyon created by your sin. So what do? Because you want to get to God. He's the source of life, right? Well, you'll build a bridge. And so you go gather materials, you cut down trees, you do whatever you can, you start building the bridge. But the problem is, what happens when you build a bridge from one side? You secure it in the ground here, right? And you start building it outward and outward and outward, but you have nothing to support it from underneath. And so eventually it cantilevers and it collapses. That's what works do. For a while, our works seem to be grounded and rooted and good, and they seem to be getting us somewhere. Oh, okay, that's good. Oh, okay, we keep building them out, but because they lack support, they eventually collapse. They can never span the gap between us and God. The works will never work. You cannot use works to overcome the depths of your sin. So if we go on reading in Romans, this is what it says. Is this blessedness only for the circumcised? Or is it also for the uncircumcised? We have been saying that Abraham's faith was credited to him as righteousness. Under what circumstances was it credited? Was it after he was circumcised or before? It was not after, but before. So Paul wants to point out here that yes, Abraham was circumcised, and that circumcision was done in good faith as a commitment to God. And God did credit Abraham as righteous. But God saw him as righteous before he was circumcised. Before the work. The circumcision was a work. God saw him as righteous before Abraham did the work. And it was Abraham's faith in God that prompted him to do the work of circumcision. It was his faith in God that led him to the level 5 commitment. And he saw that faith. God saw that faith in Abraham before he did anything at all. And it was that faith which pleased God. You see, God is not waiting for us to build something beautiful or amazing. He's not waiting to see that and then say, oh, they're faithful. If he was, we would be judged on the merits of what we built. God would say, oh, Brian sang me this really lovely song, but Kelly has a better voice, so she must be more faithful. See, if we're judged on the merits of what we build, nobody's going to win that game because there's always somebody better. God's not waiting for us to build something beautiful and see us as righteous. In fact, if God convicted you right now to get on an airplane to Saudi Arabia to spread the gospel, and you left this afternoon, went down to Nashville, hopped on a plane to fly to Atlanta, to fly to Saudi Arabia, and between here and Nashville, your plane collided with another plane in the air and exploded in a fireball, and you died before you ever spoke a word to anybody on the mission field, God would be walking around heaven going, look at my beautiful, faithful missionary. Why? Because it's not about your work. It's about the faith, the obedience that God convicted you, and you followed that call. That's what God sees as beautiful. Romans 4:16 says this, therefore the promise comes by faith. We're going to come back in just a minute, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the beauty of that faith. But what I want you to remember right now is that you have faith, and that faith is beautiful. We can really have a hard time. I can really have a hard time getting in the comparison game. Well, look what that person is doing for God. Well, look what that person did. Well, if I had just done this, if I had tried harder there, if I had done this. God is not judging the quality of your works. He's judging, he's seeking for, he's loving the depth of your faith. It is your faith that pleases God, the faith that prompts you to go to work. Let's continue in worship, and we'll come back to this in just a minute.